Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? Welcome back to Spanish Lessons with Professor Jason. In today's lesson, I'm going to focus on how to talk about your daily routine in Spanish. So you're going to learn how to ask a few questions about another person's daily activities and also how to give answers or talk about the things that you tend to do every day. Now, since we're going to be talking about everyday customary actions, I'm going to be focusing on the present tense conjugations of the verbs that we'll use, especially the yo and the tu subject positions, okay, because we're going to have a dialogue. Also, keep in mind that a lot of these daily routine types of verbs, right? Brushing your teeth, waking up in the morning, getting dressed, taking a shower, they tend to be reflexive verbs, okay? So you're going to see the reflexive pronouns me and te used quite a bit throughout the lesson. I'm also going to introduce some expressions that you can use to sort of weave your sentences and statements together more smoothly. These are temporal or transitional phrases and expressions, things like antes de, before, después de, or hasta, until, primero, first, luego, next, etc. You'll see these throughout the lesson, all right? But first of all, let's go ahead and take a look at the key verbs that we're going to be using. These are the verbs that talk about your typical, customary, routine daily activities. All right, on this slide, I have placed some of the key verbs that are daily routine verbs. And as you'll notice, when you see the se after the verb, as with the first verb, despertarse, that indicates that we're looking at a reflexive verb. So as you conjugate that, you would have to use the reflexive pronouns me levanto, te levantas, me despierto, te despiertas, se despierta, nos despertamos, etc. All right? So that's what that means when you see the se. So we have despertarse, to wake up, levantarse, to get up out of bed, bañarse, to take a bath or to take a shower. You can also use the verb ducharse, me ducho, te duchas, to take a shower, lavarse los dientes, to brush one's teeth, afeitarse, to shave, right? It can be a man shaving, right, his beard. A woman could use afeitarse las piernas, to shave one's legs, etc. Arreglarse is a verb that just means to get oneself ready, usually to go out to work, to go out for the evening, to go out on a date. Arreglarse tends to be used more for women when they refer to sort of putting on their makeup, doing their hair, and those types of things. Arreglarse, okay? Secarse means to dry, so you can use secarse generically to dry off, like after a shower, or you can use something like secarse el pelo to dry one's hair. Peinarse is to comb or brush hair, okay? Peinarse, me peino, te peinas, etc. Maquillarse, typically used more by women, maquillarse, to put on makeup, but of course there are men that use makeup. Me maquillo, okay? Vestirse, to get dressed. It has a stem change in the present tense of the indicative. Me visto, te vistes, okay? And desayunar is one of the only ones here that I don't have as a reflexive verb, although a lot of grammar and vocabulary books do list it as a reflexive verb, and some native speakers use it reflexively. Me desayuno, others don't. Desayuno a las 7. Okay? You can also use the phrase tomar desayuno, to have or to take, literally, breakfast. Tomar desayuno, desayuno. Okay? Let's go on and look at another slide with more verbs. Okay, so here we have more verbs on a second slide, and keep in mind that this is not intended in any way to be an all-inclusive or an exhaustive list of activities. That would be impossible. There's many other verbs you could substitute, but these verbs that we're seeing on these two slides tend to be sort of generic verbs that you might use to describe a sequence of things that you do on a daily basis, all right, your daily routine in sort of generic terms. So on this slide we have salir de casa, which means to leave the house in the morning usually. Ir al trabajo, to go to work. Trabajar, to work, just a generic description of I'm working, trabajo, I work. Almorzar, it means to have lunch. We just saw desayunar on the previous slide, and a little bit further down on this one we have cenar, to have dinner. Almorzar is a stem changing verb, so the O goes to UE. I would say almuerzo, tú almuerzas, él almuerza, okay? Salir del trabajo means to get off work or to leave work. Llegar a casa is when we arrive home after work or after school. Cenar, again, to have dinner. Estudiar is to study, maybe to do some homework. Mirar televisión, to watch TV. Acostarse is also means to go to bed, to actually lay down, to go to bed. But acostarse is also a stem changing verb, so it would be me acuesto, te acuestas, ella se acuesta, etc. And finally, dormirse is just a little bit different from dormir. Dormirse means to actually fall asleep, and again, it is also a stem changing verb. The O goes to UE, so I would have me duermo, te duermas, te duermes, él se duerme, etc. Okay, so those are some verbs to round out sort of the generic description of a regular day. Alright, now what we're seeing on this next slide are some transitional words and phrases that you can use just to sort of weave those activities, right, that list of activities, together in a more smooth and cohesive way. So we have words like primero, which would be first. Después can mean after that or next, as well as luego, okay, also means next. You don't want to use próximo. Let me just warn you about using próximo. Próximo is not sort of a transitional word. Próximo is just an adjective that has to have a thing after it, right? Like la próxima semana. So stick with después and luego, as we'll see in the dialogues a little bit later. Más tarde means later on. Más tarde. Todos los días, every day. Todas las mañanas, every morning. Todas las tardes, every afternoon. Again, we're talking about habitual, customary things when we talk about our daily routine. We're not talking about what we're going to do today. We're talking about what we always do. So you might say, todos los días me levanto. Todas las mañanas me visto. Okay? Hasta is good when you want to say that means until, and it's useful when you want to say that you do something until a certain time, like trabajo hasta las 5, okay? Or miro televisión hasta las 11. If you want to pinpoint the hour that something happens and say, for example, 8 o'clock in the morning, you're going to use the phrase de la mañana, 8 de la mañana. So for example, me despierto a las 8 de la mañana, or de la tarde, or de la noche. Use de la tarde, de la mañana, de la noche when you say the precise hour that something happens. Now, when you're being more general, a little bit more vague about the timeline, and you just want to say in the morning, in the afternoon, at night, you can use the preposition por la mañana, right? So I do something in the morning, right? Por la mañana. Or I do something in the afternoon, por la tarde, okay? And then a couple words for finally, you can say por último, right? Finally, the last thing I do is go to bed. Por último me acuesto, or finalmente me acuesto. Okay, now what's coming up next are going to be some questions and some mini dialogues. Okay, and before I move on to showing you some mini dialogues or some sample dialogues that you could use to combine and recombine these elements that we've been talking about, I wanted to throw out some questions that you could use to ask somebody about different parts or different aspects of their daily routine. And again, these are just possible questions. There's many variations, and you'll see some more of these in the dialogues as we go along. But here are some sample questions. Starting off with, ¿Qué haces todos los días? ¿Qué haces todos los días? What do you do every day? Sort of the most generic possible. Or, ¿Qué haces todos los días por la mañana? ¿Qué haces todos los días por la mañana? Now I'm sort of specifying in the morning. If I want to know a time that somebody does something, I use the phrase ¿A qué hora? And then the verb. ¿A qué hora almuerzas? ¿A qué hora almuerzas? What time do you have lunch? Or ¿A qué hora sales del trabajo? What time do you get off work? Okay. ¿A qué hora sales del trabajo? If I want to ask what somebody does a particular day after working, I could say ¿Qué haces los jueves después de trabajar? Después de trabajar. One thing I wanted to point out here with this particular question and the next two is that when you use antes de or después de, the verb that comes after is not conjugated. Okay, so pay attention to that fact in these last three questions. ¿Qué haces los jueves después de trabajar? After working. Or ¿Qué haces después de levantarte? What do you do after waking up? ¿Qué haces después de levantarte? Again, not conjugating after the phrase después de or antes de. And finally, here's an example using antes de. ¿Qué haces antes de acostarte? What do you do before going to bed? ¿Qué haces antes de acostarte? Okay, so after after después de or antes de, we leave the verb in the infinitive. We still have to tack on, if it's a reflexive verb, the te, okay, or the me. Después de levantarte, or antes de acostarte, etc. Now in the next slides we're going to see some mini dialogues with sample questions and answers. So, on these next 4 slides or so, what I've done is I've created or written some sample or mini dialogues using some of those questions we just saw or variations on those questions by combining and recombining the elements. And I'm going to provide questions and some sample answers of responses describing people's daily routines or activities. And remember, these can be recombined in many different ways. These are just possible examples. Things may be said differently in different dialects, etc. I'm expecting lots of comments about these particular answers. So here we go. ¿Qué haces todos los días? ¿Qué haces todos los días? Me levanto a las 7 de la mañana y voy a la facultad a las 9. Llego a casa a las 6 de la tarde y estudio un poco. So not a lot of detail, but sort of just a generic description. Next mini dialogue. ¿Qué haces todas las mañanas? ¿Qué haces todas las mañanas? Me despierto a las 6:30, me baño bien rápido. Luego me visto, me peino y desayuno. Después me lavo los dientes y salgo de casa a las 8. So more concentrated that one on the morning activities. Okay. Perhaps a woman might respond to that same question. ¿Qué haces todas las mañanas? This way. Me despierto a las 8, primero me ducho y me lavo el pelo. Después me arreglo para ir a trabajar. Me seco el pelo, me peino, me maquillo. Finalmente me visto y tomo un café antes de salir. Alright, next set of questions. ¿A qué hora almuerzas? Almuerzo a la 1:30 de la tarde. Almuerzo a la 1:30 de la tarde. ¿A qué hora sales del trabajo? ¿A qué hora sales del trabajo? Salgo a las 5:30, pero no llego a casa hasta las 7. Salgo a las 5:30, pero no llego a casa hasta las 7. Okay, so those questions are focusing on asking about a specific time that somebody does something. Okay, on this next slide we have a question focusing on a particular day of the week. Okay, ¿qué haces los jueves después de trabajar? Después de salir del trabajo, tomo unas cervezas con mis amigos. Después vuelvo a casa y ceno con mi familia. Normalmente comemos tarde, a eso de las 9 de la noche. Más tarde miro un poco de televisión con mi esposa. Por último, me lavo los dientes y me acuesto a las 11. So again, just an example of what somebody does on Thursdays after work. Alright, and on this final slide, a couple questions using the temporal expressions, adverbial phrases, if you will, después de and antes de. Okay? And so notice on these, immediately after the después de or the antes de, the first verb is not conjugated. First, ¿qué haces después de levantarte? Después de levantarme, me ducho, me afeito, me peino y me visto. Luego desayuno, me lavo los dientes y salgo de casa para esperar el bus que me lleva al trabajo. I'm going to read that answer once more. That question and answer once more. ¿Qué haces después de levantarte? Después de levantarme, me ducho, me afeito, me peino y me visto. Luego desayuno, me lavo los dientes y salgo de casa para esperar el bus que me lleva al trabajo. So I leave the house to wait for the bus that takes me to work. Right? And one with antes de, in this case, before going to bed. ¿Qué haces antes de acostarte? ¿Qué haces antes de acostarte? Antes de acostarme, miro el noticiero en la televisión. A veces leo un poco también. Generalmente me duermo poco después de la medianoche. Antes de acostarme, miro el noticiero en la televisión. A veces leo un poco también. Generalmente me duermo un poco después de la medianoche. Alright, so there you have some key verbs with transitional and temporal expressions as well as some sample dialogues that can help you to be able to talk about your daily routines. Of course, all of these elements can be recombined in a ton of different ways depending on what it is exactly that you want to ask or express. Okay, just go back through the lesson and figure out how to recombine those elements. Anyways, I hope that you've enjoyed this lesson and found it to be useful. As always, I welcome your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please take a moment, leave a comment, and let me know what you thought about this video lesson, all right? Until next time, this has been Professor Jason. Thanks for watching. Hasta luego. Ciao.